Okay, it looks like we may have everyone that is joining us today. I'm going to put my video on. So hopefully everyone can see me. I do have my video going. If for some reason you're not able to see me, you can certainly text or message Tyler, my colleague who's with me today. And sometimes it's just a matter of you changing the view on your screen. In case you really, may not want to see me, but if you really do want to see me, there are ways to set up your view so that you can see me presenting. My name is Carolyn Lamparella. I am the Director of Preferred EAP, your Employee Assistance Program. And today we're going to be talking about creating a climate of psychological safety through empathic leadership. And this is a new topic, really, that I've been presenting on recently. More and more companies have been asking for a training like this about empathic leadership. So critical right now during, certainly during the time of COVID, where we are seeing employees and employers struggling so much more than we ever have before, making so many adjustments, adapting to change. The stress levels are high, and not just the employees, but obviously leaders are feeling a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety now as well. So often, during those stressful times, one of the things that suffers is our empathy, right? Because when we're under stress, we have that tendency to go into survival mode. And when we are in survival mode, it is often challenging to support one another in the way that we can. So we're gonna talk about how you can just create an environment where people feel safe, where they feel like they can connect with you, where they can lean on you as a leader, and have some specific strategies about how to do that. And hopefully, if you have questions, maybe we can even have a little dialogue. We'll, toward the end, give everyone the opportunity to unmute themselves. I would love to hear from you about your personal challenges, anything in particular you'd like to share, anything you're doing that you think is working really well. We certainly like to hear that too. I am going to begin our time together with a video, and I'm going to have Tyler go ahead and launch that video.
When I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor, a mom, and a doctor.
I want to be a famous soccer player.
A fisherman. I want to be a fighter. I want to be a scientist. When I grow up, I'm going to be a teacher. A vet.
I might want to be a police girl.
Dentist.
When I grow up, I want to be a prospector.
A plane flyer.
I want to be a veterinarian.
A helicopter flyer.
I would like to be a teacher, maybe.
A taxi driver.
I want to be a computer programmer, like to make video games.
I want to be an architect.
I want to be a singer.
Superhero. Another veterinarian. Another doctor.
When you look into these faces, it's pretty easy to realize each one is someone's precious child. Someone cares for them, someone values them, someone wants them to be happy and find fulfillment in their life. To them, work is gonna be fun. They'd never dream that work might be a dismal existence where they're micromanaged into a state of oblivion. Because they feel valued, appreciated, cared for. They have no reason to believe that somebody'd go out of their way to make them feel less than that. So what happens? Why is it when we go to work, most employers don't think of us as precious or valued? Instead, we are what we do. We are functions rather than people. We're expendable. We don't really matter. Wouldn't it be great if we lived in a world where, wait for it,
Everybody matters.
There's not a person in this world that I know that likes to be micromanaged.
I don't think that people really necessarily feel valued at all.
I think more of them think less about their people and more about their bottom dollar.
What about your bosses?
Can we change the song here?
If you had a better boss, what would a better boss do?
More friendly, more appreciate the employees, maybe it will be nice.
Most managers and bosses that mean they don't show that they care. That's really how they are.
If you care for them, they feel
they feel something for the company. And it's not just, I'm working for someone that actually cared for me when I needed someone to care for me or something like that,
My company's been good to me, but they drop me if the dollars and cents aren't there, But I don't blame them for that. That's business. That's America.
Anybody that's got a job they complain about, they need to go somewhere else, because that's not good for your health.
And a lot of people are doing just that, leaving. According to Forbes, 2 million people leave their jobs every month because of poor leadership, lack of trust and empowerment, internal politics, and a lack of recognition. A Mercer study showed 32% of the workforce is actively looking for a new gig at any given moment. And 75% of workers say they'd take another job if one came along because they don't feel valued, appreciated, or cared for by their employer.
I just talked to a lady that worked for me at the other company. She hasn't had a raise in 7 years. She went to the boss the other day and asked if she could get a raise, and their response to her was, "You're getting a paycheck every Friday. If you don't like it, leave."
The short-sightedness of this sort of thinking is comical, and the productivity loss due to low morale is staggering. A Gallup study found in the U.S. alone, unhappy, disengaged, unfulfilled workers cost the economy up to $500 billion per year. That's $500 billion of lost productivity. What about the fact that just doing the right thing, doing good, could actually make work and the world a better place? Best-selling author Simon Sinek has been saying that for years.
I think the major problem in business leadership today is that there is no leadership. There's a lot of management. It's a very short-term attitude to just think of people as a resource that you just pay and expect them to do their work. You don't even have to take it from a human perspective. The human perspective, isn't it good to look after people? This is a team. We're responsible for the lives of human beings. But if you want to be cold-hearted about it, people who like coming to work more are more productive. People who feel safe amongst their own, who can trust the people that they work with, are more likely to offer bigger ideas, take better risks, be more innovative, be more productive. There's a whole host of good business reasons that has nothing to do with the humanity of it all.
Are you stopping there, Tyler?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. I hope everyone we didn't hear from the chat that people weren't able to hear that or see that. Was everyone okay? As far as you know?
Yeah, I didn't see anything come through, so.
Okay, great. So that video comes from a website called Truly Human Leadership. It is it's a book that was written by a gentleman. His name is Bob Chapman. The title of his book is Everybody Matters. And Bob Chapman is the CEO of the Barry Weimiller company. And he is a major advocate for empathic leadership. But I like his story, and I really encourage you to, if you haven't heard about him, to take a look at some of what he's done, because he didn't start off as an empathic leader, right? He became CEO of the company really overnight after his father, who was the current CEO, passed away very suddenly. And he suddenly was in charge of this company and went through all the trials and tribulations of building a company. They had tremendous debt. They had to go through layoffs at times, and he went through this whole progression as a leader and recognized on the other side of it that he, as a leader, he, needed to be more empathic. He needed to, as those kids said in the video, he needed to treat his employees as though they were like his children. They needed to feel cared for in order for his company to survive. And so he went through this shift. He's an accountant. He went through this shift of being really focused on numbers to really being focused on his people as his most valuable resource. And really, that's what we're talking about when we talk about empathic leadership. I want to begin by just kind of helping us understand what we mean by empathy, right? Empathy is really the ability to tune into somebody else, to kind of have an idea of what they're feeling, without them having to say so. It's our ability to kind of read their behavior and to sense what might be going on with them, and connect with them. But there's different types of empathy, and it's important to distinguish the different types. One type is cognitive empathy, right? That is when you really understand somebody's thoughts, the way they think about things, their perspective, the type of language they use to describe, things. And that's important as a leader to have that cognitive empathy, because it helps us with communication. You've probably had the experience of talking with somebody who's using a lot of jargon, a lot of words that don't make sense to you because it's not the way you think or talk about the world, right? When that happens, you feel disconnected. Cognitive empathy is really understanding, somebody's perspective about the world. How do they think about the world? What are their thoughts, and just being able to see their perspective, right? That's cognitive empathy. Then emotional empathy is being able to sense their feelings, right? To have an idea of when you see certain behavior, it might be an indication of certain feelings that they're experiencing. But when we talk about empathic leadership, what we're really talking about is more than just emotional and cognitive empathy. We're talking about empathic concern. This is when you as a leader truly care about the people that work for you, where you treat them as though they are like your own family, right? You truly care about what happens to them. And think about it for a moment. Think about all the bosses that you've had in your life, all the people that you've reported to. Who are the ones that you value the most? What are the characteristics that they had that made you value them so much? I'm guessing that you would say that you felt as though you mattered, right? That they cared about you. They weren't just trying to get you to perform, but they truly cared about your well-being. That is what we really mean when we're talking about empathic leadership, is recognizing that you are the steward of these individuals. You can move to the next slide. And so one way to think about that is, as Simon Sinek said in that video, there's a difference between leadership and management. And years ago, before the United States, one of the things that makes me sad about that video is the gentleman who says, oh, well, that's business. This is America, right? Well, guess what? It didn't used to be America. Layoffs were not standard operating procedure for a long time. It really began in the 80s. And actually, it's sort of traced back to the Reagan years. And if you remember the air traffic controllers who went on strike, that's really when this whole concept of layoffs became really popularized. Prior to that, people, when they went to work, they really did feel valued, right? They felt like they were part of the family. And that's why so many people used to go to work and stay with the same company for a long period of time. Well, that unfortunately has shifted because we have moved away from the concept of leadership and adopted more of the idea of management, right? Where we as the supervisors or managers are trying to get people to do what we want them to do, versus leaders who inspire people to do the work. You can move to the next slide. So, just these definitions are actually come from Bob Chapman, who is as I mentioned, the CEO of Barry Waymiller. He talks about management as the manipulation of others for your success. So managers tend to try to get people to behave in a certain way so that they can meet their metrics, that they can produce, that they can report back all this productivity, right? It has to do more with my success as a manager, getting people to do what you need them to do so that I look good as a manager, versus leadership. You can move to the next slide, which is defined as the stewardship of the lives of the people that are entrusted to you. It's a completely different perspective, right? In management, we tend to be very task-oriented. You know, we're really focused on the performance. When we are leaders, we really focus on the people, right? We really have a strong understanding that these people come to work and they want to enjoy their job, like those young kids. Like, who would ever think when you're a young child, if you have kids, you would never tell them, oh, you're going to hate work, you know, get ready for it, right? You're going to go off to work, and we're trying to inspire them. We're trying to get them to think about, what do you want to do with your life, and get excited about work and show up to work and want to be there, right? That's what leaders do, is they inspire that feeling in their employees. They create this culture that makes people want to be there, right? And so that's ultimately what we're talking about when we talk about empathic leadership. One way to do that, you can move to the next slide, is through psychological safety. Okay, what is that? Why psychological safety, right? Next slide. What we know, when people come to work, they are actually feeling way more vulnerable than we often realize, right? So when we show up to work, you know, one of the things that we're all struggling with and we're all dealing with on a daily basis is we're monitoring our personal risk and our image. We're making decisions all day long about, is this something that I can speak up about? Or do I just keep my mouth shut and do it, right? We're always wondering, like, how am I coming across to my bosses, right? How am I coming across to my colleagues? So the way our image, you know, is always being monitored, and we're always making adjustments to try to determine, is it safe or unsafe, right? And so creating a climate where people do feel safe, imagine how much this part of themselves relaxes, right? It takes a lot of energy for us to constantly be monitoring, you know, the work environment and wondering, you know, if I feel distressed about something, am I allowed to speak up? Am I allowed to say something? You know, can I ask my boss this question? Can I, you know, that takes a lot of energy and can be very distracting for employees. So psychological safety, let's move to the next slide. How do we define it? What does that actually mean? It means that a belief that you will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. It's a permission to be honest, right? It's feeling as though I'm allowed to speak my truth. I'm allowed to talk about what my experience is honestly, without fear of repercussions. That is ultimately what we mean by psychological safety. You can move to the next slide. And why is that so important? Well, there's some interesting research. Amy Edmondson, who's referenced on this slide, she did a great TED Talk about building psychological safety at work. And she studied the healthcare environments, and to see, you know, because we're always concerned about patient safety. And one of the things that they found is that the number of reported patient errors, so this is, you know, individuals who are working, healthcare workers, nurses, physicians, it's their responsibility to often identify when an error has occurred, which can be a very scary thing, right? To admit that there was a patient error. Well, they found that the number of patient errors strongly correlated with perceived openness of the teams. So the teams, the units that actually felt the most openness with one another, that felt the greatest degree of psychological safety, reported more patient errors. Why? Because they did not believe they were going to experience repercussions for that. For them, they viewed it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to improve. But it required that feeling of psychological safety. You can move to the next slide. So what we know about psychological safety is it does occur at the group level, right? Often we place a lot of pressure on individuals to speak up, and we will admonish them if they don't speak up. If there's a problem and somebody doesn't report it, we think that it's an individual problem, but it really is a group problem. If you have an individual who is afraid to speak their mind, yes, they might have the type of personality that prevents them. Maybe they're a little bit shy, maybe they are fearful, but ultimately, as a leader, it should be an indication that there's a group problem, that there's a systemic problem. If you have individuals on your team who are really fearful about speaking up, the first thing you need to do as a leader is to evaluate the group. You can move to the next slide. And this whole concept of psychological safety, it really emerged from a research endeavor or a project that Google took on called Project Aristotle. I don't know if any of you have heard of that. But Google early on was trying to evaluate when they were putting teams together. They thought that there was like the perfect constitution of a team, right? If they just got all of the characteristics correct, then these teams would be high performing. So they were evaluating what are the factors, you know, for those really high performing teams. Was it because they were all similar? Maybe they were all like-minded, or maybe they weren't like-minded. Maybe they had people who had different strengths, and bringing people with different backgrounds, maybe that was the factor that would result in them high performing. Well, to their surprise, they found that psychological safety by far was the most important variable, as indicated by the conversational turn taking. So the teams that demonstrated the most turn taking when they were discussing a problem, everyone had a voice, everyone spoke up, everyone chimed in, whether they were outgoing or shy and reserved, introverted, extroverted. Everyone felt safe having a voice. And the other thing they found is that there was a high degree of sensitivity to social cues. What does that mean? Let's go back to the emotional empathy, right? What does that mean? It means that we are tuned in to what other people are conveying via their nonverbal behavior. We're just having the ability to kind of connect with people without them having to say what's going on, right? So there's this high degree of sensitivity or empathy that is going on in these teams, and everyone feels able to speak up. You can move to the next slide. So, you know, whenever I talk about this, you know, one of the things that I hear often is, you know, oh, you know, people are too sensitive. Like, you know, why do we have to go to this degree to take care of people? You know, the employees should just, you know, handle it, or they should just suck it up and deal with it. You know, so there's always this concern about excellence. Well, if we, you know, if we're too empathic, then there's no accountability. And how are we going to strive for excellence? And one of the things I hear a lot is, I don't want to coddle my employees, right? And I've heard it so much that I had to look it up. I'm like, what are we talking about when we talk about coddling our employees? So what is the definition of coddle? It's to treat someone in a way that is too kind and gentle, and that protects them from pain and difficulty, right? Well, that's not what psychological safety and empathic concern is about. It is truly not about being nice, right? It's about being honest. And actually, there is some interesting research on teams that are over empathic, supervisors who are too nice. That is a problem, because if there is no accountability, if we aren't able to share negative feedback, then we do have performance problems, right? So creating a culture of psychological safety is not about being really nice all the time and only giving praise, right? That's not what we're talking about when we talk about empathic understanding, empathic concern, and psychological safety. You can move to the next slide. This is a better way for us to think about this, right? So this is an indication of, compares psychological safety with performance standards. What happens when we have low psychological safety, when the environment is not safe, and we have low standards of performance, right? When we have, maybe we're too nice and we're not holding people accountable. Well, that's considered the apathy zone. What do we see from employees when that kind of environment is going on? Well, they tend to not be engaged, right? There's no standards, there's no pressure to perform, and they don't feel safe, right? So they're not going to speak up, so they just kind of come to work and, collect their paycheck, right? Well, what happens when the psychological safety is really high, like it's really a safe environment, everybody is nice and kind and treats each other well, but the performance standards are low. Maybe you're on a team where everyone is just too nice. People are afraid of conflict. People don't want to give you any negative feedback. And maybe it's all about praise. Well, that's considered the comfort zone, right? That's when you have people showing up to work and maybe they're not really doing their job. Like, they're getting along. They feel safe speaking up, but they're not feeling that tension to perform, right? That's the comfort zone. Well, let's look at what is a more typical environment. And certainly at EAP, this is what we hear more about, is when performance standards are really high and there's a high level of accountability, right? But the psychological safety is low and people don't feel safe. They show up to work. They're afraid of admitting that they've made a mistake. They're constantly worried about making a mistake. They don't want to speak up. They sometimes will see things happening, and because they don't feel safe, they're not going to bring that to your attention, right? That's the anxiety zone. And that, from my perspective, is what I have seen more often than not, is companies who kind of operate in this anxiety zone where, people are coming to us at EAP, and as employees, the number one thing they're talking about is fear of losing their job, fear of being accountable, fear of making a mistake. And that is, not where we want our employees to be, because we are not getting the most out of our folks. We are not inspiring them when they operate in this anxiety zone. The ultimate goal here is to have high psychological safety and high performance standards. That is the best scenario, right? Because that's the learning zone, right? That is when we recognize that mistakes and failure are the key way for us to grow. If we can't make a mistake at work, then our growth is suppressed. We cannot improve if we are afraid to take a chance. And so ultimately, that is the goal here, is to create a culture where people feel as though they can continue to learn and grow through their mistakes. You can move to the next slide. And so how do we do that as leaders, right? This is tough, because I know that, leaders and managers, they're being, report to people as well, right? And you're being held accountable for those things, and you're feeling that pressure to perform just like your employees are, right? So how do we move into this learning zone? Well, the first thing we want to do is to really view the work in the proper context, right? This past year has been a great example of the VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? COVID has highlighted that more than anything, how volatile the world can be and unpredictable. And what does that mean? It means that we have to rely on one another. We have to emphasize that interdependence. We've got to create that sense of teamwork, right? Because this is particularly true in the healthcare world, and I've seen this, because, COVID stressed our healthcare system to the absolute limit, right? The way that they typically operated, often, the nurses and the physicians sort of operate in their silo, where I'm only concerned about my patient. I'm only concerned about taking care of what I'm responsible for. Well, that no longer worked in this volatile environment, right? They had to shift their focus to teamwork, to really thinking about how they can support one another, right? Because COVID stressed us all individually, our home lives, our work lives. We had to be interdependent. We had to learn how to rely on one another. And we had to really connect with our sense of purpose. Why am I here, right? You want to add meaning to the work. And so the first step as a leader to inspire and to create psychological safety is to connect with your employees and find out, why are you here? What is meaningful to you? What aspect of your job fulfills you? And if nothing is fulfilling you, let's talk about how can we add more meaning to your work? Because ultimately, one of the things I hear time and time again is people want to feel as though they matter. Like when I show up to work, I want to know that I'm doing something that matters, that is meaningful, no matter what it is, right? So adding meaning to the work, really focusing on that sense of purpose, is a way to begin. And having that conversation with your employees is really important. You can move to the next slide. The other thing as a leader that is important for you to do, and this is hard for leaders, right? Because often as leaders, you feel like you have to have all the answers, right? And so you yourself may be really fearful of making mistakes. And so you may be presenting to your team as though you got it all figured out, right? But that's rarely true, right? We are all human beings. And so allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to share that vulnerability with your team, with your people, is one of the best ways that you can create a sense of psychological safety. Because if you feel comfortable talking about your vulnerability, guess what? Your people are going to do that as well. Most people don't like that word, vulnerability. When I use it, they think, oh, that means I have to share all this personal stuff. I don't want to share my personal life with my employees. That's not what vulnerability really is about, and the most effective type of vulnerability in the workplace. The best type of vulnerability that a leader can demonstrate is, you know what? I'm not so good at the details. I'm better at this, but I notice that you're really good at the details. I might miss something. Can you help me out, right? That's acknowledging the areas that you may be weak in, being honest about those things, but identifying who on your team possesses those strengths, right? And how can you rely on one another in order to get the job done, creating that interdependence. When leaders are able to acknowledge and model their own fallibility, it sends the message that mistakes are part of the process. It's part of the learning process. I'm learning as a manager, as a supervisor, just as you're learning as my employee, right? So that by far is the best thing that a leader can do for their team. You can move to the next slide. The other thing that you can do, I encourage, this is like the one piece of advice I give to everybody. Approach situations, every situation in your life, with curiosity, and invite people to provide their input, right? Ask direct questions. What did you see? What was your experience? How do you perceive the situation, right? It lowers the psychological cost. It prevents people from having to speak up on their own, from just having that courage. And often I see teams suffering when a leader is like, well, it's not my problem if you don't speak up. If you're upset about something and you don't tell me, well, guess what? That's your problem. That does not invite psychological safety. That is not empathic understanding. Empathic understanding is recognizing that, geez, this employee may be fearful about speaking up. So I, as the leader, am going to invite their input. I'm going to say, I'm wondering if you're feeling like this. You're going to be curious. Be curious and share that curiosity with them so that you stimulate that conversation and let go of the expectation that people should just automatically feel safe. And if they're experiencing a problem, if they don't speak up, oh well, too bad for them. That type of approach just discourages people, and it does not really acknowledge, again, that psychological safety occurs at the level of the group. And you, as the leader, are responsible for the group. You are responsible. You set the tone for the culture of the group. And so it isn't enough just to place that burden on the individual. So you, as the leader, model that curiosity, ask those questions, check things out. Hey, this is what I'm seeing. Is this what's going on with you? Be curious, right? And create that opportunity for people to give you their input. You can move to the next slide. The other thing that you want to do is embrace the messengers, right? Often we reward people for their performance. If there are certain quotas they have to meet, we have all of these metrics, where we're measuring their performance, and we celebrate, those people who accomplish those things. But we have to start also embracing those people who speak up, who say, you know what, we have a problem here, and the reason we're struggling is because of this. We've got to celebrate those people. And we also need to celebrate people who have made a mistake and learned from it, right? That is really, really critical, right? Because I was listening to something recently about the idea of self-doubt and anxiety. And it was sort of framed in negative connotations, like if you have self-doubt or you feel anxious, that's a bad thing. But truly, it only is a negative thing if you feel anxious and you're worrying, and all you're doing is ruminating, just worrying, worrying, worrying. But if that anxiety propels you to take some sort of action, right? If you're anxious or worried about something and you take an action, you do something to try to address that problem, right? That is when anxiety becomes a positive, because it's actually moving us forward. But if you as a leader have created an environment that does not encourage risks, that does not encourage people to take a chance to speak up, then guess what? Those employees are just going to be anxious. They're going to be ruminating. They're going to be worrying without feeling as though they can take some action, right? If they are doubting themselves, if they feel like, geez, I don't know, I'm learning a new task, I'm learning something new on the job, and I'm having some self-doubts, I have questions, there's things that I'm not certain about. If they feel as though they can't speak up, then guess what? That self-doubt is going to become debilitating. But if you have created an environment where they feel comfortable saying, you know what, I'm not sure if I've gotten it yet. You know, can we go over this again? Or, you know, I'm having doubts, you know, can I do this or that? Or encouraging them to take some action and then really celebrating that. You know, celebrating when people take those steps. Because again, that conveys the message to them that it's safe, that you're not going to punish them for speaking up. You're going to reward them for speaking up. You can move to the next slide. So with that, I'd actually like to open it up. I think we have, how many people do we have on? Let me see if I can find my attendees. So I'm just curious if there are any questions or thoughts about what I have shared. Anybody have any situations that they'd like to discuss? I believe Tyler, my colleague, has made it possible for you to unmute yourself. And do we have any questions in the chat? Does anybody have any comments about that? I mean, I'm curious if you feel as though the work environment that you are operating in does promote psychological safety, or if you have any thoughts about things that can be done to improve that psychological safety or that empathic understanding, that empathic leadership.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike. I've got a bit of a question and a comment. I think you bring up a really good point in having to show that sometimes you are lacking in areas. You do make mistakes. You're not perfect as a supervisor or a manager, and need to own up to that and improve. Sometimes I think that's a difficult line or a difficult thing to do, because you don't want to come off as incompetent.
Right.
So I guess my thought about that is it, you think, situationally, personally, how do you sort of balance that, I guess?
Yeah. You know, I think that's a really, it's a really valid point. And this is one of the reasons why I think leaders withhold, right? Because we are so concerned about being viewed as incompetent. But in reality, every human being possesses strengths and areas of weakness, or areas where they are not as strong as their strengths. So the goal here is to present yourself as a whole person, right? You acknowledging that, geez, you know, I'm really not good at that. Like I know for myself, one of my colleagues that works side by side with me, he is incredibly good at the minutia, the details. He can hold details in his head better than anybody. Well, I am terrible at that. Like that is my biggest weakness. And that is something that we talk about a lot, he and I acknowledge that this is an area where, you know, I might be lacking and you are really strong. And so when we're reviewing a problem, I will often run it past him and say, you know, this is how I'm seeing it, but I know that you have the ability to see it at a level of detail that I might not. Can you review it as well? And what that does for the two of us is it makes us feel interdependent, right? It's not, I'm not saying, you know, he recognizes my area of competence, I recognize his area of competence, but we also are clear about where we are weak and where we can depend on one another. And so it is important to have that dialogue with your people, you know, to acknowledge your strengths. This is what I'm really good at, I think, but this is where you might need to help me out, you know, because you're really strong in that area. I think it's just it's something that you continue to have that conversation with your folks, and I can tell you that they will appreciate that because you acknowledging areas that you're working on, that you're still trying to develop, is going to help them feel comfortable acknowledging the areas that they're still trying to develop. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. It does, and I think I've found that. I think I've found with a few guys on the team here that there'll be some things that head my way that's required for me to get done, or some details that's I could find or spend more time to find. But if I kind of approach the people I know that would have them faster or better detail, there's a bit of an appreciation there that I would come to them for that information, which in a sense is acknowledging that, yeah, I'm going to be slow to get this done, or I may not be complete in getting this done, but I trust
Right.
that you're going to give me everything that I need, and that's why I've come to you.
Right, right. The other thing that I see, when I work with employees, one of the things that employees often struggle with, they have a misunderstanding actually about their managers and supervisors. They're assuming that you know everything, right? And so employees sometimes will get really angry or frustrated with their manager or supervisor because they assume that you see everything, that you know everything. And so one of the things that I'm always doing with employees is reminding them that, your manager, that may not be their strength, or you may be better at that than your manager, or they may not be making that observation that you're making.
Uh-oh. Lost the audio.
Yeah, it looks like Carolyn may have lost connection. I'm going to see if we can get her to hop back in real quick. Everybody could just sit tight. That'd be great.
Glitch. So one of the things I want to emphasize to you as leaders, that part of their EAP service is consultation for you as a leader. And it does not count toward your session benefit. It's something that we just provide in an unlimited amount to managers, leaders. If you are struggling, if you want to get some coaching or some help in how to create this kind of environment for your teams, you can use EAP for that purpose, right? That is one of the services that we provide. And unfortunately, often leaders don't take advantage of that. And so I want to remind you that if you do have questions, or if you would like some additional support in, or if you want to just, come up with a plan, you can use your EAP benefit for that, right? So don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if you're not sure, if you go to our website at preferredeap.org, we have a contact us page. You can just kind of send us, give us a paragraph about what you're experiencing and say, can you guys help me with this? And we will get back to you and help you problem solve. So don't forget that that's available to you as a leader. Any other questions or comments? So the one thing that I want to emphasize is, everything that I just shared, I shared very quickly, and it made it sound very easy to do, right? But we know that it's not. Moving from a manager to a leader is a challenging process, and one that is important for you to engage in very intentionally, right? We don't automatically become leaders, right? We have to really work at it. And so it begins with, again, being curious, you know, I would encourage you as a leader, if you've never done this, to sit down with your team and see if you can invite feedback from them. This is actually a great barometer, a great way to test the psychological safety in your team, is to have a team meeting and just say, hey guys, I really am curious about how you feel I'm doing as your manager, as your supervisor. Do you have any feedback for me? And see what happens. And if it's just crickets, like if no one says a thing, well, you might have some work to do as a leader, right? To create an environment that encourages people to speak up. The other thing that I would encourage you to do is, when you are meeting with your teams, please note who is speaking up. And are people taking turns? Or is it only one person that is kind of dominating the meeting? Is there a sense that everybody has a voice, right? And if you notice that there are people that just aren't speaking up, rather than just saying, oh, that's just how they are, see if you can invite them in, right? They might need more encouragement from you in order to speak up. It might be helpful to have a private conversation with them to really understand, do they feel safe, you know, and to let them know how much you value their input and encouraging them to speak up. So that, you know, it's as a leader, it is important. You know, we spend a lot of time evaluating the people that work for us. We don't often give them enough opportunity to evaluate us as leaders, right? We have to create those opportunities for people to tell us how we're doing. And if they're really struggling, if they're afraid to give you that feedback, that's an indicator. That's an indicator that you might have some work to do on creating that sense of psychological safety. Any other comments or thoughts? Anybody have anything any situation that they would like to share? I think, I believe Heidi, are you on the, Heidi and Petra? Is there anything in particular that you would like the folks to know, or that you want to make sure is shared? Anything you want to emphasize while we're all together?
No, I thought that was very good.
Okay, great.
Petra, how about you?
Really great, very beneficial for the team, so I appreciate it.
So again, you know, like I said, these are pretty simple concepts, difficult to implement, because especially when we are dealing with the level of stress that we are all experiencing right now with COVID. And I know there's a lot of changes going on at the company level for IQE, and these are challenges that you're facing that can sometimes cause us to become, you know, step into that micromanagement as a way of managing our own anxiety. So that's just something to be aware of. You know, how do you as a leader respond to stress? Do you find yourself losing your empathy, which is a normal response to high stress, high burnout situations? We do tend to lose our empathy, right? And if that's the case, and if you are noticing that you're caring a little less, or it's becoming harder for you to support your people, you know, rather than really being judgmental or really hard on yourself, just take that as a warning sign and get some help, get some support, because it's not easy. You know, leadership and management is incredibly challenging. And so again, at EAP, we want to support you, and we want you to know that we're there for you. So never hesitate to reach out to us. Anything else? Anybody you can also put questions in the comment section if you don't want to speak up. Anybody have anything else that they'd like to share? Okay, well, thank you so much for being here. I truly hope this was helpful. We have recorded the session today, so anybody who wasn't able to attend can certainly view that. But as I said, please remember that EAP is there for you to provide coaching and consultation for any situations that you're dealing with. And we look forward to connecting with you and helping you in the future. I hope everyone has a great day.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Take care.